People are confused, like, what is this proposition saying? What am I voting for? And then they'll vote for something.
The system that is death, economical system, and we have to change that.
I'm appreciative that the Creative Society has a system that works. If the system was working for everyone, we would not have homelessness, we would not have poverty. In the Creative Society, we're talking about complete transparency. Can you imagine there being everyone voting, like the whole world? People know how to organize themselves to self-govern again. This is about bringing the power back to people, self-governance, bringing the power back in our hands. Welcome, and we're back. I'm in, are you in?
I'm in, I'm in.
We're talking about the Black experience of being human in the Creative Society. And we're several episodes in by now, so you've got to catch up if you haven't seen all the other episodes. Because today we're going to be doing an overview of not only economics and self-governing, but also technology. And Lennice, when you think about self-governing, and you think about our community and self-governing, what comes to your mind?
Well, what comes to my mind is just being focused on what we have to do, and also us having our own vote, on our own way of doing things within our own community, because a lot of times we look towards other communities to do something for us. And that's not really self-governing. That's more or less depending on another group of people other than our own group of people to judge.
Also, what I've always known when it comes around election time, as it's popping up in the United States 2024, we're always having to look at, the Black vote, and that becomes like the deciding factor in elections. And then after the Black vote is taken or used, it's whatever promises were made by that politician kind of disappeared.
It usually is ignored. And then you get frustrated because you said, we go with this group, whether it's Republican or whether it's Democrat, or usually those two parties, and somehow we seem to be left out either way. And it's very frustrating. And you know, we are a lot of times skewed by media, by normal of television ads that at that time seemed to be in our favor, but when they're in office,
all changes, huh?
It just goes the opposite. It just goes the opposite direction, and we wonder what happened. Why are we still in the same situation year after year, decade after decade, and it's frustrating.
And so another thing I like about the Creative Society, again, they're transparent and they break it down. They actually explain how the whole self-governing process works. And I was surprised. I'm like, how are we going to self-govern ourselves when some of us barely can get along with one another in our community, because there's so many differences and so many challenges, and economics are always having a play in how we behave in society and how we react in society. That's always a challenge, usually.
And two, we don't understand politics, really. We don't understand how it's run. We don't know how judges are picked, or a lot of us, as far as the majority part, really don't understand the power of the politics in this particular system here in America. So we get the shorter end of the stick all the ways.
And what I like again about the Creative Society and their plan is, can you imagine there being everyone voting, like the whole world?
Oh man.
50 plus 1, and then that vote passes. It's literally your vote, because we live in California. And we talk about the two-party system all the time. This is important. I bring this up. One of my strengths as an investigative journalist, I'm also a political journalist, and when you look at the politics as an example in California, in this two-party system, it's mostly a Democratic state. So even if you vote, the Electoral College, which has been in place for, decades upon decades, it usually goes off of the norm of California being a Democratic state. So even if you vote for a Republican per se, it's almost like your vote doesn't count, because the Electoral College decides on the majority of the vote. And if your representative is mostly a Democrat, then that's what gets voted in versus your choice as a Republican. Not to say one way is good or bad, but I think it is better for the people to have the power in their hands.
One thing I like about the Creative Society is all digital. You have your cell phone, you have whatever the topic is that you're voting for, and it's worldwide. 50% plus one, worldwide, majority. That determines your livelihood, that determines what direction a certain policy, a certain action is going to go. Is pretty unique.
It is unique. And so in the first video, like I said, we have a lot to talk about in this two-parter. We've got two parts we're discussing, because we did say we're going to be talking about self-governance. We're going to be also talking with there's an excerpt where Chief Economist John Perkins explains why it's so important for us to have an economic structure and a plan. We're not just talking about these things as if it's not in existence. They're already created the plan for us to get started. And we look at the transition period that all of this is going to be happening in real time. So let's start with the self-governing laws and see what that looks like. And we got technology that's intertwined with that as well. And so we'll talk a little bit about technology after that, but let's take a look at this clip.
Our future is in our hands. There has never been anything like the creative society in human history. We have no experience of living in such a world, because in all social systems that have existed in our history, leaders have always kept the power for themselves, while in the creative society, people do not delegate authority to anyone, but make all the decisions themselves. That is called self-governance. What will it look like in practice? Let's take a look.
Life is like a chess. Pawns can only move forward, and one at a time. And they're often sacrificed. Knight can move in an L shape and can cleverly outmaneuver the others, while the queen has the power to move around the board at will. We get used to the rules and obediently follow a single game. The same happens in society. We are offered several politicians to choose from. We think we choose. But we only vote for those who are offered. We give them complete power over our lives. We become pawns. Once politicians get power, they arrange wars and crises, sacrificing us, yet we support them by loudly repeating memorized slogans. Or we argue and support others, new politicians, empowering them this time. And everything repeats. We are persuaded that there are no viable models for the self-organization of society without authority. But isn't there such a model in fact? Or is it just that those who claim so do not know about it, or do not want to know about it? Yet, what if we change conditions, stop playing and begin to live? What will the world look like where people are in control of their own lives, self-organized and truly free and conscious in their choices? Not just individual small groups, but all 8 billion people on the planet. There is such a model, and it is called the Creative Society. Let's see, how will it look like?
For several years, volunteers had been spreading information about a completely new format of society worldwide. And after that, people all over the planet held an international referendum at which the creative format of society was almost unanimously adopted. This led to significant changes both in relationship among people and on the planet as a whole. All artificially created crises and wars in the world have stopped, The problem of hunger has been resolved with a short period of time, since human life became the main value in the new format of society. The newest advanced technologies, which were inaccessible for people in the consumerist format, have started to be introduced everywhere. Everyone has been provided with a social package that includes a modern dwelling with an area of 60 square meters per person and an unconditional basic income equivalent to $10,000 per month. All basic needs of every person are fully met, but the main thing that each of us has gained is the right to be heard. We have transitioned to a completely new format of decision-making, self-governance. In the creative society, there are no presidents or parliaments anymore, not to mention dictators. There are only people, and every person's voice is equally important when decisions are being made.
Mom, do you decide everything now like the presidents did before?
There are no more presidents of any kind anymore, sweetheart. I'm human, just like you, and now there is no one above people, so people themselves decide everything.
Does it mean that you can change anything in the world?
Well, not really. My opinion is just as important as opinions of billions of other adults on the planet. But one person, no matter who he is, cannot promote a project which only he himself likes and which most people are not satisfied with.
Why?
Because majority must vote for it.
So I'm going to pause there for a moment to discuss that, because that can be a hard concept for people to understand self-governance. Well, if we look at how the United States was built, separating themselves from England, they came over here and they had to rebuild a society and a government that worked for them at the time. Even before that, though, when Florida, if we look at the big chunk of Florida, that when Spain was in charge of that territory, and also when we look at California, where Mexico was in charge of that territory, there are a whole bunch of different presidents, and then when that broke off and became a part of the United States, you had a whole different self-governing that had to restart each time. So why am I saying this? I'm explaining that people know how to organize themselves to self-govern again. We've seen it in history. Maybe they didn't have the technology in history, but to them it was technology that was used to be able to separate themselves and to self-govern during that time when they separated from England. They had to come over here, whether we appreciate or how it happened. The forefathers created a constitution, a US Constitution for people to abide by the rules. So with the creative society, you're talking about a self-governance that does not involve a president, because everyone is individual.
Yes. One thing I was noticing also, in certain regions, I know it's a worldwide voting, but if you live in, say, for example, like we live in California, what can we vote for as a particular territory of, like Central Valley, of issues that's happening in that particular area? Would the whole world vote for that? Or would somebody in that particular territory vote for whatever issues that might be happening in that particular territory? I'm just giving the questions that some of you in the audience might have, and might be questioning, and might be thinking. And these questions are well deserved and well thought of. And that's the questions that you can bring about to us in a creative society as we map down and look at all the different areas. But for the most part, we're looking at the whole world. Okay?
8 billion people.
Billions and billions of people throughout the world. And as my wife would say, Julia, 8 billion people. What is the best for the planet? Because we're looking at a planetarial extension, as we would call it. And we all have to work together and be as one united front for the climate change and for the issues that's involved.
Self-governing, when we look at the aspect of it from the creative society perspective, allows everyone to be informed. You can't just vote without knowing what you're voting for. They make sure that you have both sides, and they make sure you have all the information before you just vote. And looking at the pros and cons, transparency is what's most important. Because if we look at now, example, California propositions, they are convoluted. People are confused, like, what is this proposition saying? What am I voting for? And then they'll vote for something. a perfect example, Prop 209.
Yes.
People didn't know what they were voting for.
No.
They thought they were voting for equal rights for everyone, but then it blocked out black and brown people who then became marginalized just in the California society thanks to Prop 209. It's been a nightmare since the 1990s, this one proposition, because it was so convoluted with all this language that was used to confuse people.
Well, that's why also they have what we have as the black media to break those issues down in that sense.
Well, that wasn't there.
It wasn't
when
there
Prop
at
209.
that time. No, it wasn't there at that time, but now it is a little bit, in fact, there.
It's too late. The law's already been passed. We have to go to the courts to reappeal this
That's
Prop
correct.
209.
That's correct.
So there's no more of that. There's no more of these confusing laws that are purposely put to confuse folks by special interest groups who create these propositions because they want to win. Perfect example, another California law which raised the income, the tax income bracket of property, your property taxes. And that was by special real estate interest groups that passed it without anybody knowing. Remember that? And
Yes,
people didn't
yes.
know it was passing. So what that meant was people that had homes in their families for, let's say, over 100 years, and they're renting it out. And this is their way of income. This is their only form of wealth, because for black wealth, it's very difficult in the United States. So having a home is considered wealth. Unfortunately, what they did was, in this new law that would have to be reappealed, which these special real estate interest groups passed, the property is taxed based on the current tax bracket. So even if the home was bought in 1950 and the taxes were much lower, let's say that the taxes in 1950 and property tax was about $100, and you're renting this property out. Now, today, in 2023, let's say those annual property taxes are $10,000 for that property that was bought in 1950. That's the problem.
Yes.
And this is the law that was passed, just giving you an example of all these convoluted laws. In the Creative Society, we're talking about complete transparency and no taxes, first of all. Want to get that clarified. And no property taxes. But your vote will actually matter. Your vote doesn't go through an electoral college process, which, in my opinion, was initially created to keep certain groups out. If we look at historically the Reconstruction period, where African Americans were being voted into office, then they changed the laws where if you were a black person, you're only 3/5 of a person. So therefore you couldn't really be considered into being a politician. And so that immediately took all of those black people out of those positions, and because they're only 3/5 of a human being. Ridiculous laws.
Yes, yes.
So fast forward to today in the Creative Society, everyone is equal. There is no discrimination based on you being black or brown or yellow or white. It's just your vote, you as a human being. I have to reiterate that because this self-governing process is so important, and it can be done. We saw our forefathers have to put in a system, whether we agree with that current system or not today, they still had to find a different process that was separate from the King of England when they came here to the United States. Those are the facts. So when people say, oh, I can't envision being self-governed, well, so many societies have done it over and over again, but not just with today's technology. So I wanted to that's why I want to stop that point. Let's continue.
That we, as community, decide by majority vote whether something will take place or not. Self-governance is not the absence of management or competent planning, but rather it's the absence of authority, although its function is equally shared among all people. Voting for a project becomes the right of every adult on the planet. And the advantage is that people themselves aspire to improve the living conditions in society. It becomes a crime to change something in people's lives without asking them. To exercise people's authority, we use such a tool as the Electoral Platform. It is essentially a website that allows people from all over the world to adopt decisions transparently and quickly. If a global issue is submitted for voting, people from all over the world must participate in voting. If an issue is local, then residents of a relevant territory whose lives are affected by adoption of this law must vote. For example, if there is a village issue, it is resolved in the village. If an issue is regional, it is resolved in the region. Thus, there is local self-government as well as global that applies to the whole world. Each law proposal is written in a language that is simple and understandable to people. Experts should prepare a draft law and explain what the expected results would be, the pros and cons of its implementation, what will change for an individual, and how the law will affect his life. Then the draft law is submitted for general voting.
A new global law proposal is up for a vote by humanity.
What is this?
Read out the draft law.
Global law proposal on introducing fuel-free power generators worldwide. An FFG is a device that enables you to generate electricity without the use of power plants or any other energy sources or generators that exist today.
Read me the pros.
Do you want it in brief or in detail?
Tell it in brief. Take into account my preferences.
In brief, an FFG will ensure everyone's energy independence. That means you will never have to pay utility bills again, and your favorite matcha tea will become cheaper. Just like all the other goods and services, because there will be no electricity charges. FFGs will also benefit the environment. Taking into account your hobbies and preferences, your biggest benefit from implementing FFGs will be that you won't have any need to fill up your car.
Okay, I vote.
You cannot vote before you listen to a detailed version of the law proposal with a description of all the pros and cons, as well as the expert opinion.
Okay, read it then.
Pros: energy independence.
Everyone should first familiarize themselves with the law proposal in full, and then make a decision to vote for or against it. A person votes directly, without intermediaries, because this decision will affect his life. A law is considered adopted if it is supported by the majority of people, 50% plus one vote.
That's interesting. The project is global. Pros. Okay, cons. Who is the initiator? A group of experts from power supply sector. They have a good rating.
Disadvantages of implementing FFGs.
So I wanted to pause right there, right? Self-governing. We read your comments, by the way, online, and we appreciate your comments, and thank you for that. And so I read one of the comments where they felt that this was going through, or they made the comment in reference to that this is socialism. However, I say that this is about bringing the power back to the people, self-governance. I don't know if that's called socialism. I think that's called bringing the power back in our hands. And I remind everyone that before every society began, they had to self-govern. I like what Jeremy said, representing the people of Lakwa. He said that all of the tribes have always practiced self-governance. That's nothing new. That's always been there. That's always been the same. And hence they've been able to thrive, and their tribes have always been able to stick together and stay together. So that's the perfect example of self-governance that works.
One thing I noticed also that it explained in detail what voting is in the regions, and votings in whether it's a tribe or whether votings in a particular territory versus all over the world. And right now you have to ask yourself, is this system working for you? What we are in now? Where we are at now, whether you're Black, Hispanic, whether you're white, whatever color, whatever region, whatever area. How is your life managed now with this form of voting? The difference is we have the technology. You notice that the votes are handed with handheld cell phones. That's modernized. Well, we didn't have that back in the 70s or the 60s or the 40s. Now you can communicate all over the world simply with your cell phone. So the technology is here now to where we can self-govern and also through the Creative Society put ourselves in position where the people have the power and you will be empowered.
And the Creative Society is one way and the only way, we keep saying, because it's about bringing everyone unified under one umbrella, one race, which is the human race. And so you hear us say that over and over again. It's not a canned phrase, no joke, no hoax, as Roy Starr would say, our friend Roy Starr here, because we know the plan, because we've gotten to see it, we've gotten to understand it. So that's what we're doing here in the Black experience of being human in the Creative Society, is just explaining the excerpt that we thought would be important, because I know self-governance is important to you and me.
Yes.
And we don't like some of the laws where in our region, and we didn't get to vote on most of the laws in our region, because when we vote, people in our community feel like their vote doesn't matter, so they don't vote at all. And people say, why vote? The system's never going to change. It's always a select few. They're going to have the power. So why should I even vote? They tell us that all the time.
Yeah, it was a time in my life when I was younger, I didn't really vote.
We felt the same way.
You know, what's the use? You know, it's the same old process, the same old system of discrimination that we feel, at least I feel, every day. So you feel that you're not empowered. You feel that your vote don't matter, and it's the same thing over and over and over again for not just a year, for decades and decades and decades. And you don't see the kind of quality of life that you would like to see, particularly in my own community, the Black community, throughout the regions where I live. And you feel frustrated, and you get tired of being frustrated, so you just say, oh, what the hell, I'm not going to do it, I don't want to do it.
You feel insignificant.
You feel very insignificant. That's the key word, insignificant.
Yeah. And so we want to let you know that there's been chief economists involved. So John Perkins is the next clip we want to play for you, to let you know that there have been some experts in operation, making sure that we have a plan that works. And they have either done the research or have learned from other cultures, other societies where they are self-governed. And like I said, most countries that were built had to start in some type of self-governing stage where all the people had to be organized. Whether we agree with the format or not, everyone had to go through that process, either or. So let me cue it to that.
Who calls today's economy the economy of death. He writes about it in his best-selling book, The Confessions of the Economic Hitman. So John Perkins is a specialist who knows the consumer's format system from the inside out. He understands more than anyone that the current economy system leading us all down a blind alley. It has been a pleasure to meet him, and we're delighted to have him today with us. John, the floor is yours.
So welcome to Global Crisis, There Is a Way Out. I personally am very happy to be here. I'm John Perkins. I have a background as a chief economist at a major consulting firm, but perhaps I'm better known as an economic hitman. People all over the world are understanding that the system that we now have just isn't working. I'm blessed with the opportunity to speak in many different countries on just about every continent. And everywhere I go, I see that people understand that we've got to stop climate change. We've got to stop species extinctions. We've got to stop environmental destruction. People know this everywhere. And so those are all symptoms of the death economy. We know we've got to turn this around. We've got to create an economic system that works. It's an illusion to think that we don't have power. We in some respects, we're living in this illusory society where everybody's told, and the advertising tells us, and politicians tell us that that somebody else has the power. We have to turn to them. But the fact of the matter is, if you look at the people who've changed throughout history, whoever your heroes are, these are just human beings. And when they started, they didn't know they were going to become heroes. They didn't know they were going to become world known. And you may not become world known, or you may not want to be, but you can play an incredible role. And once you get started doing this, the satisfaction that it brings is phenomenal. Whenever we realize that we must change and we start to invoke these changes and we start to implement these changes, there's always pushback because the status quo thinks that they don't want change. And little do they know, even the very richest and most powerful people politically, they're in trouble. They're in a lot of trouble. The planet's in trouble, and so they're in trouble. But they'll push back, and that's historical. But whenever there's pushback like that, we can take strength from it. We realize they're pushing back because they know that we're winning. And it doesn't matter from what country you hail, what your religion is, or your nationality, or your culture, or the color of your skin, or anything else. We're all in this together. And we are unified in the fact that we're all threatened by the death economy. So let's recognize that it's also important to unify to develop a life economy. It's happening, and people like you and I and everybody who's participating in this magnificent program is part of that. It's an exciting time. Thank you, everybody, for participating in this, and what an amazing time we're in, and like this. Interconnected global system that we're participating in is amazing. Thank you. I appreciate what you're doing.
So we just watched that the system is not working. And that's exactly what we were just discussing, is that the politics only work for the select few. It's not fair.
Even if you are wealthy, he said, is you living in a death environment in a sense, because we are dealing with climate change. Just look around you. Just go to different parts of the world, or not even go different parts of the world. Just look in your phone and go on YouTube and see that there's snow over here.
In April.
And wind is blowing like something that's out of this world. And you see the rain that's coming down and flooding certain areas. Wealth is not going to cure that. Celebrity status is not going to cure that. We're dealing with some serious, serious problems right now, and we all, again, has to come together. You have a chief economist is talking about the system that is death, basically, economical system, and we have to change that.
I'm appreciative that the Creative Society has a system that works. It's been researched by, again, chief economists like John Perkins, showing what does work for everyone. If the system was working for everyone, we would not have homelessness. We would not have poverty, which is what we have now. If you go throughout California, the poverty is stricken so many different cities throughout California. I promise you it's a sight that you don't want to see. But guess what? This poverty is not only happening within the United States. You can go to other countries and see the same thing. And so we know the system is not working because people are starving all throughout the world in different countries. We have the system here at the Creative Society where people no longer have to starve. And that's when we get to talk about the technology, the replica, and also the capsule, because people's health are also in jeopardy. So we're going to give you a briefing right now, and let's talk a little bit about technology. And then in our part 2 system, our part 2 episode, we're going to show you everything. We've gotten to see how technology is helping us with the election process, with the self-governing process. That is very important.
Very important.
Now, when I was growing up in the Silicon Valley, in my backyard was IBM, Xerox, Apple didn't exist yet. Steve Jobs was just a young guy. And that was something like this iPhone wasn't thought of. Wasn't thinking about it. Back then we had the old school computers, like the black and green screen. And you had to know MS-DOS so that you could do the coding and make the screen do all kind of repeats. So that is the technology back then in the 1980s where people could not think of this iPhone.
You know, when I think of the iPhone right here, let's go back. Let's go back in the 70s.
Right.
We have to memorize phone numbers and write it down. If you want to call your grandmother or you want to call your friend, you have to memorize
but wait, there's more. Tell them about the landline. They don't know it. Maybe some people don't know what that is.
Yeah, I'm showing my age. Okay. For the millennials, you probably don't remember this. But the landline, you have to remember. You have to dial.
They won't remember, but you remember.
Are you punch the keys on the phone and everything else? It was just limiting, is the best way to say it. I would have never imagined that I would be so dependent on a computer that I carry on the palm of my hands, where I can literally look up anything. Before, we have to go to the library and look up some cards.
It's called a card catalog.
A card catalog, and discover a book. Now the book is right here on your phone, and it can read to you in any different voice that you want. So, you know, the technology is increasing. And a lot of times we can't imagine something that's so far ahead to where we can't even believe that it's possible.
Well, what I hated about those rotary phones that you're talking about, where you had to dial it and go right?
Yes.
If you dialed the wrong number, you had to start all over again. And so it was like the most infuriating thing. We were so happy though when the technology of getting rid of those rotary phones was just a push button. AT&T came up with, you press a button, oh my gosh, you hear a tone and you don't have to do the rotary. No more of that. We were so happy about just being able to push the buttons.
Remember when you have to go to a phone booth and you have to put a dime in a phone booth?
They don't know what a phone booth is.
No, okay. Some people do. The ones that do know. You go to a phone booth, and if you don't have coins, you can't make a phone call. Or if the phone booth is taken up by somebody, you have to wait in a line. We don't have that now. We have access to reaching people at will.
Yeah.
You know,
the phone booth became obsolete because technology itself became refined. We didn't complain then. I didn't complain about the phone booth because I remember having to call someone across the states and it cost like extra money. It was like 25 cents and I was running out of change and it would only last for like 3 minutes and I don't have any more change and okay, and it just hangs up on you. And so technology, we have to embrace it because we've always embraced it and we've always been happier when something different comes to make our lives easier. Most people don't have landlines as much anymore, which means a plug in a phone line that you plug into your system in your house, and that's what's called a landline. I remember we were at my girlfriend's house. We were at I think it was maybe Thanksgiving, and she said her kids were at their grandparents' house. A phone was ringing. They didn't know what it was, so they didn't know how to pick it up. And so everybody was staring at the grandmother saying, like, what is that? Because she was like, why isn't anybody picking up the phone? But her children didn't know what a landline was, and they didn't know that was a phone. That was the funniest story when Marie told us about that. And the whole thing is, that's okay, because technology is always going to keep changing, making our lives better. And we can't be afraid of technology.
No.
Terminator movies, all those things, that's on purpose for entertainment. And that's if technology gets in the wrong hands when we look at those type of movies. But what about Star Trek? Where like the tablet was something no one even thought of when they were watching, when my brothers were watching that in the 60s and 70s, they're several years older than I am. They were so enthralled by Star Trek. Oh, look at the technology, and that they would just watch it all the time. Then we got tablets. We got iPhone made their tablets. Android has different tablets. There's all these different tablets and technology.
Just with this iPhone or the phone that we have now, you know, my father was a blues player. You know, he was a singer. And just to have this phone back in the early 80s or to film him perform, we didn't have that. You have to bring this big old giant camera in and you just got to hold, and it's a big old production to just get footage to where now just in the palm of your hand and turn it this way, you can get clear footage of anybody performing, and you can have that forever and save that forever. And that's a value that a lot of us take for granted today.
So that hopefully gave you the precursor to join us in this part 2 that we're doing of these episodes. And in the second episode of this part 2, which is not the second episode, it's just the next episode, we're gonna bring you the technology that the Creative Society has already got in operation. It's already happening. And we just want to give you that precursor that, look, technology is always changing. So it can't be unbelievable, it's believable, because that's how technology works. It pops up and we're like, oh yes, an iPhone. Remember, cell phones didn't always look like this in our day.
No.
Cell phones used to be like the gray and black screen, and you could dial someone and it was remotely, and we thought that was cool then. So you got to embrace technology that makes our lives easier and as always in bettering our lives. So as we close on this part 1 of looking at I'm in, are you in?
I'm in.
I'm definitely in. I love new technology.
Me
and
too.
We're going to continue to bring you this information in the Black experience of being human in the Creative Society. And I do read your comments, and I appreciate all of your comments. I will try to comment on those who have questions, so please comment on the videos. A tech team will tell us, or I myself will look. So thank you for joining us in this part 1 of this episode. Join us in the next part 2, right after this next episode that you're watching, so we can break it down about the replicator and about the capsule. Oh, you got to hear about the capsule.
Oh, yes.
My name is Dudley Najieb, along with
Lennice Najieb.
And until the next episode.